Warfare, in the conventional strategic imagination, is inextricably linked to the visceral imagery of muddy trenches, scorched earth, and the rhythmic roar of artillery barrages. However, by late November 2025, the global community witnessed a profound and disquieting shift in the kinetic theatre of this conflict. The flames of war were no longer confined to the terrestrial borders of Ukraine or the attrition-heavy Donbass front. Rather, the operational footprint metastasized, extending its alarming tentacles into the deep maritime commons from the Mediterranean and the Black Sea to the distant littorals of West Africa off the coast of Senegal. Across social media platforms, imagery of oil tankers engulfed in infernos and footage of USVs impacting civilian merchant ships like guided munitions have proliferated. These sequences are being framed and touted as a form of triumph, as empirical evidence of modern warfare innovation. Western capitals and the Kyiv government have not hesitated to characterize these as brilliant, asymmetric strikes against what they pejoratively label Russia's shadow fleet. Yet, if one strips away the glossy veneer of wartime propaganda, if we temporarily suspend the rhetoric regarding freedom of navigation or the glorification of asymmetric warfare, a far bleaker and colder strategic reality emerges. This campaign does not represent a dignified or legitimate projection of military power. Conversely, it resembles the desperate gambit of an alliance failing in its economic warfare objectives, compelled to tolerate extreme measures in a frantic attempt to salvage strategic credibility. When unarmed commercial vessels, transporting nothing more than crude oil and commodities, become legitimate targets hunted within international waters and the exclusive economic zones of third-party nations, we are forced to interrogate the integrity of the very rules-based international order the West claims to uphold. Is it possible that, finding themselves unable to secure victory on the economic and diplomatic chessboard, certain actors are willing to upend the board entirely by transforming the global oceans into a vast, unregulated minefield? This establishes the critical context for understanding why, as this analysis seeks to elucidate the West's economic firewall, is disintegrating. Simultaneously, a dangerous paradigm is emerging, the weaponization of soft targets, where commercial shipping and civilian mariners are thrust directly into the kinetic center of the conflict to deconstruct why civilian oil tankers have devolved into targets for missiles and suicide drones. We must retroactively analyze the macroeconomic landscape of the past 3 years. From the genesis of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the United States and the European Union were confident they possessed the ultimate weapon, comprehensive economic sanctions. The prevailing orthodoxy was that by embargoing Russian hydrocarbons, enforcing price caps, and prohibiting Western P&I clubs from insuring Russian vessels, Moscow's economy would implode within months. They termed this strategy a financial firewall, designed to asphyxiate Russia's war machine without discharging a single bullet. However, the reality of 2025 has delivered a devastating blow to those strategic calculations. The Russian economy has not only avoided collapse, it has maintained growth despite being under a comprehensive siege. Russian oil, the black gold of the Urals, continues to flow in robust volumes to India, China, Turkey, and across the global south. Trade data indicates that, rather than being strangled, Russia has rapidly and effectively reconfigured its global export architecture. What the West dismissively terms the Dark Fleet is, in operational reality, a massive flotilla of independent vessels, hundreds of tankers operating entirely outside the jurisdiction of Western financial institutions. These vessels fly diverse flags of convenience and utilize alternative insurance and financial clearing systems. The existence and robust expansion of this fleet serve as irrefutable proof that the era in which the West could unilaterally dictate the terms of global trade has definitively concluded. Precisely because of their near-total inability to interdict the flow of capital to Moscow through legal and economic channels, the West and Kiev have been backed into a strategic corner. Unable to arrest the trade with paperwork, they have elected to sabotage it with explosives. The pivot to targeting civilian commercial vessels is a tacit admission that the sanctions regime has failed comprehensively. This course of action is not strategic in the military sense. It does not alter the balance of power on the battlefield, where Russia retains overwhelming fire superiority and tactical initiative. Instead, it constitutes pure economic sabotage, reflecting a dangerous mentality of, if you cannot regulate the system, destroy it. From this, another descriptor emerges to characterize the situation: normative dissonance, or the deliberate tolerance of double standards. One of the most reprehensible aspects of this maritime campaign is the inversion of the moral standards the West frequently employs to judge the world. Let us conduct a comparative analysis. When Houthi forces in Yemen interdicted merchant shipping in the Red Sea, the US and UK immediately condemned it as an act of violent extremism, a grave threat to the principle of freedom of navigation. They swiftly assembled a military coalition and executed airstrikes on Yemen to punish these transgressions. However, when Ukraine executed nearly identical acts, utilizing drones to strike commercial ships transiting international waters or the EEZs of neutral nations, the Western reaction was diametrically opposed. Not only was there an absence of condemnation, but Western media eulogized these attacks as a bold campaign, a prime exemplar of creativity in asymmetric warfare. Why does such a profound moral chasm exist? Is it possible that the Western definition of extremism versus heroism is not predicated on the nature of the act, which remains an attack on civilian shipping, but solely on the identity of the perpetrator? The same action, if undertaken by a force deemed unacceptable by Washington and Brussels, is labeled terrorism. Yet, if executed by a Western proxy, it is elevated to a military achievement. Vessels such as the Kairos and Virak may transport Russian crude, but they fly the flags of neutral nations like Gambia and Panama. More critically, their crews consist of international civilian mariners from India, the Philippines, Vietnam, and Africa. These are non-combatants, contracted laborers, not Russian military personnel. Converting them into military targets risks crossing the threshold into war crimes, a red line, to which the West is deliberately turning a blind eye. Behind the detonations at sea lies a seldom discussed mastermind, NATO's technological and intelligence infrastructure. Casual observers consuming surface-level news might naively believe that Ukraine, with its domestic military infrastructure severely degraded, could independently command sea-baby USVs over thousands of kilometers of open ocean to execute precision strikes off the coast of Senegal in the vast expanse of the Black Sea. But the operational reality is that an unmanned vessel, no matter how sophisticated, is merely a projectile. For that bullet to find its mark, it requires eyes and a brain. On the vastness of the ocean, isolating a specific target among thousands of transiting vessels requires an immensely complex, real-time intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance architecture. Reconnaissance satellites, over-the-horizon radar, signals intelligence aircraft, and advanced data fusion capabilities. Ukraine does not possess a global constellation of military satellites, nor over-the-horizon ocean surveillance radar, nor the long-range maritime patrol aircraft required to persistently track targets off West Africa. So, who provides the targeting coordinates? Who guides the suicide vessels to the terminal phase? The answer, deduced from military logic, is unambiguous. It is NATO's global ISR network. The attacks on Russian-affiliated shipping off the coast of Africa suggest that the West is not merely supplying hardware or general intelligence, but is directly participating in the kill chain. Ukraine pushes the button, but NATO illuminates the path. This elevates the conflict to a proxy war at its most dangerous and escalatory level, where NATO utilizes Ukraine to execute acts of sabotage that its own forces would not dare claim openly, for fear of triggering a Article 5-level global conflagration. These attacks are not merely military gambles. They represent an environmental hazard and a severe disregard for the sovereignty of third-party nations. Strikes have occurred within Turkey's exclusive economic zone and off the Senegalese littoral. This implies that maritime domains under the jurisdiction of neutral states are being converted into active battlefields without their consent, a blatant violation of national sovereignty and international maritime law, consider the specific scenario. What if a target laden with 80,000 tons of crude oil were breached? A successful detonation would not only sink the vessel, but trigger a catastrophic oil spill. A slick of black crude would devastate marine ecosystems, decimate fisheries, destroy the livelihoods of local fishermen, and pollute the tourist coastlines of Turkey or West Africa. It appears that in their tactical fervor to inflict maximum damage on Russia, the strategic planners are utterly indifferent to these ecological externalities. They are willing to transform the coastal waters of sovereign nations into toxic waste dumps to achieve a short-term political objective. This demonstrates an extreme degree of unilateralism, prioritizing factional interests over the collective security of the international community. Turkey, despite being a NATO member, has been compelled to issue warnings, indicating that even allies are becoming alarmed by the lack of restraint shown by Kyiv and certain NATO leadership circles. Finally, if we soberly assess the strategic efficacy, the question arises, will these attacks force Russia to capitulate? The answer is unequivocally no. Russia, an energy superpower possessing a massive merchant fleet and an adaptability forged through thousands of sanctions, will not be destabilized by the damage of a few vessels. This damage is akin to a scratch on the hide of a trillion-dollar economy. Conversely, these actions may trigger disproportionately brutal retaliatory responses from Russia if Ukraine establishes the precedent that commercial vessels are legitimate military targets. Russia possesses the capability and justification to declare that any ship entering the port of Odessa or the Danube river ports is also a military target. In such a scenario, who suffers more? Ukraine, a nation almost entirely dependent on external aid and agricultural exports via sea lanes, would be economically strangled if Russia decided to enforce a total naval blockade of the Black Sea with its superior naval assets. In this context, attacking oil tankers resembles the behavior of a gambler facing ruin, recklessly throwing his last chips into an all-in bet on a faint hope, oblivious to the fact that he is digging himself deeper into the abyss. In summary, the attacks on Russia's shadow fleet off Turkey and Senegal are not resounding victories. They are a warning bell for the entire global order. They mark the definitive failure of the diplomatic and economic tools upon which the West placed such high hopes, while inaugurating a new, dark chapter in modern conflict, the era of the piratization of statecraft, where the fundamental distinction between military and civilian targets is dangerously blurred. When the oceans are transformed into free-fire zones by actors operating under the shadow of superpowers, the world becomes infinitely more perilous. The West may momentarily rejoice at the sight of a burning Russian tanker, but the cost is the gradual erosion of international trust in the very order they claim to protect. Amidst the fury of geopolitical calculations, the most pressing question is not who wins or loses in the short term. The existential question is, when civilian merchant ships become legitimate targets for military strikes under the tacit protection of superpowers, does any sanctuary remain on the high seas for human development, or are we unwittingly regressing to a chaotic era of state-licensed piracy? That concludes today's analysis. Please leave your thoughts in the comments section to further discuss the blurring boundaries on the world's oceans.